All right, we're learning the first mimer here in the book of one of the first mimers here in the book of Likuti Torah on the matot. Matot. This week is a double portion, matot and maseh, and we're learning a mimer from matot, and it talks about the war that Moses made on Midian, and it says, "Hey chaltzu," the take men from the war from from Israel and make a war against Midian. And so the Rebbe says, what does this have to do with us? And he explains that Midian is, but first of all, everything that's in the Torah is inside of us. And all the battles that are fought in the Torah are battles that we must fight inside of ourselves. And in this case, Midian is the propensity which is found in every single Jew to hate every single other Jew. Sounds a bit strange, but this, in fact, is a thing which is so common, what is it called, ubiquitous. It's everywhere and all the time, that we don't even notice it. And we always make excuses for it. And we justify ourselves. But the fact of the matter is that it's a very, very common and very easy for one Jew to hate another Jew, or to hate all the other Jews, or to hate particularly Jews that don't agree with me, or don't look like me, or don't talk the way I want, to say the way I want, look the way I want, think the way I want. And even if it's in a very, very fine way, right? The repercussions are catastrophic. To the point where it says that that's the reason that the second temple was destroyed. And why it hasn't been rebuilt, because we haven't really overcome this fault. It's still there. If we would overcome it, then that's going to be one of the main jobs, perhaps the most difficult job of the Mashiach, is to do away with this hatred. How can it possibly be? So the Rebbe says it's such a deep thing inside of a person. Egotism. A person thinks about himself, he cares about himself, and he is very apprehensive about anything that might come to sort of disturb himself. Where does this come from? It comes from a lack of trust in the creator of the universe. And of course you have to be, there's a thin line between caution and paranoia. If you go and take the driving lessons to before you drive a car, that's now called paranoia. Right? If you're afraid of just jumping into a car and just driving without taking any lessons, not knowing which side of the road you're supposed to drive in, right? If you're afraid of that, that's called caution. That's normal. On the other hand, if you finish taking all the lessons and you get your thing, and you're afraid of driving on the street because you're afraid maybe somebody's going to go over the line and knock into you, that's already called paranoia, because it just doesn't happen. So, a phobia, whatever you want to call it. So the same thing is also with, why do we hate other people? So the reason is that we do it because the Jewish people, first of all, have to be attached to God. They have to be. It's part of their essential identity. And being attached to God means what? Responsibility. That's what it means, responsibility. So everybody knows, we talked about this before, every Jew knows, down deep, we talked about deep down, super subconscious, subconscious, that they really have an obligation and they're really responsible to the creator of the universe, and everybody knows that they're not filling their responsibility. So you can do either one of two things. Work hard, try to change yourself, realize your responsibility, do everything you can in order to do it, and it's a very happy thing. You're serving the creator of the universe. Or blame everybody else. Say it's everybody else's fault, and then that frees you from your responsibility. What can I do? I'm helpless. I can't do anything. Right? I'm a helpless person. Right? We see how untrue this is, but unfortunately how people fall into this fault. And of course there are certain restrictions. Of course there are restrictions in the world, but you can overcome any obstacles. without making war and destruction and hating, etc. But here we're talking about the main obstacle is well, first of all, what's the main job? The main job is to serve the creator of the universe, to make this world a better place. And that's the whole idea of the Holy Temple. And one of the big obstacles to this is refusing to accept responsibility, refusing to, how do you say, take a message from your feeling of guilt. Right? Guilt is a very healthy thing. If it's used properly, you did something wrong, it's a very good thing. Right? The big thing with the Nazis, they didn't have any guilt. They could kill people all day and massacre all sorts of people through the bombs, and they never felt guilty about it. No feeling whatsoever. If they would have discovered by accident that they had killed their own son or daughter, then they would feel terrible. But killing other people is no problem. So guilt can be a very good thing. A very good, very positive thing. If it's overdone, of course, it paralyzes you. But on the other hand, it's very good. So what does it mean good? Good, it means, guilt means that you feel I have not done my responsibility. And the person takes it on themselves and try to improve themselves. But in order to do that, you have to feel your responsibility. So it says, that's the whole idea of the Torah. The Torah reveals God in the world. That's called making peace. When God is revealed, then there's peace. Everything works together. Right? When the boss comes in, the children are fighting, all of a sudden the teacher comes in or their father comes in, then all of a sudden they make peace. Right? They make peace. He did this to me. Who did that? Let's hear your claims. Let's hear your complaints. And then you can make peace between them. That's the whole idea of the Torah. The Torah was given to make peace in the world because the Torah is the will and the wisdom of the essence of God. And we talked about this before, that there's 4 letters of God's name. The letter Yud indicates how God, so to speak, hid himself in order to create the world, called the Tzimtzum. The little point on the top of the Yud is called from the essence of God. The letter Hey talks about how God creates the world, all the spiritual worlds. The letter Hey. And the Torah, which is that's signified by that little point, that unifies the whole entire business. That unifies, that's called making peace in the Pamilia Shalmaila. Similarly, also making peace in the lower. That's the letter Vav He. It says, to you, God is the Gedula, V'Gavura, V'Tiferes. This is God's emotions. Just as God has emotions that he created the world, and he created the world in 6 days, each day corresponds to another one of God's emotional traits. But also, when the world was created, so also there's a mirror. The world can be an imposter called Zeh L'Umat Zeh. The world can copy God. What do you mean the world? Us. We feel that we are God. And that's what's called God's 7 bad emotions. What do you mean bad emotions? He creates this potential for selfishness. And the way to fix this whole thing up, is by the Torah. To eliminate the separation. So let's see. That's the 7 emotions of God. This comes from how does the evil exist in the world? It comes from what's called God's left side, God's severities. We said before that was a very good thing, that God did that in order to create the world. Yes, it is good, and its source, it is very good. When it's coming from God, you see that, but when it seems to be separate, then it's very, very bad. Like it says in the Zohar, the Yamin of Ismola, that there is, in the Zohar, the Kabbalistic book, it says that by God there's what's called God's right side and his left side. Namely, God's kindness and his severity. That's in the Sitra of the Kedusha, that's in the side of holiness. Umikava small, mishtalshal, but from the left side, so to speak, the severities of God, it comes down into the physical world, and there can be an overpowering of concealment. Too much concealment. Like we said before, a proper amount of fear is called caution. That's good. An improper amount, that's called paranoia. Just like it says that in the upper worlds, that from the power of God can come what's called the river of fire. Dinor. It's drawn from the sweat of the angels. That's the whole idea of hell. Hell comes from the leftover energy and life force from these angels. Therefore, fixing this up is by means of, how do we fix it up? By attaching everything back to the Creator. In other words, no matter what situation you are in, to think, what does God want me to do in this situation? That puts godliness into the world. That's how do we know what God wants? That's what the Torah is for. That's the whole idea of the Torah. The Torah is the whole idea of bringing God's kindness, God's love, God's order, God's creative force into this low, limited, concealing world. That's the whole idea of Korach. Korach, his name Korach means to be like ice. Korach also means to be split. He wanted to divide the left from the right. He didn't want there to be an inclusion. He loved egotism. And that's how he convinced everybody. Moses, he told the Jewish people, Moses took us out of Egypt. He gave us the Torah. But Moses wants us to do always what he wants. And he says he knows what God wants. Well, my friends, enough. We received the Torah. We know what God wants. Let us be alone. We can be free. Defund the police. We don't need anybody telling us what to do. Zeu heipech yesod Torah. That's the opposite of the Torah. You have to know that God wants you to limit yourself. And if you do all of it, you want to be free, then you're living in a world of total limitation. You can never do anything that's infinite. Everything you do is going to be selfish. And therefore the Torah is called Torah Chesed. Therefore the Torah is called the Torah of kindness. That's the idea of God's right hand. It says, God, your right hand is elevated, b'koach, in power. That's uniting the power and the darkness of this world with the creator of the power and darkness, namely God. By means of this, it says, God, your right hand destroys the enemy. Again, I said this before, and I'll say it a lot of times, but the Rebbe said, if the 7 Noahide commandments had been taught before World War II, it could have been that the whole World War II would have been avoided. There would have been people in Germany that would have said, this is not what God wants. And God will give the power. There would be people that would be willing to be self-sacrificed. The only voice in Germany would not have been the voice of murder and destruction. Alder says, similarly, Gam will call it Torah. All the punishments of the Torah, even though that they are very strict, sometimes flogging, sometimes different death penalties, but nevertheless, the fact of the matter is that because they come from God, and you know they come from God, then this is really kindness, that the punishment fixes up the soul. I mean, just in a very short way, we know that everybody dies, right? Everybody dies, but the soul does not die. The soul is eternal. And in fact, God puts in the world, I mean, there's been billions, trillions of people that have lived in the world. Their soul was in their body, and that's it, right? And they died. But the soul does not die. The soul is eternal. So it's like God puts the soul into the body in order to fix the world up, to do what it's supposed to do. In the end, it says the body is going to raise up in the dead. We're going to see that the body was really higher than the soul. But meantime, the main thing is what we don't see. Somebody once asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe, what's the point of you doing all these miracles? You know, the Rebbe healed. Says the reason of doing the miracles is that people will start to realize that there's more to the world than meets the eye. That there are forces of good in the world that we can't see and we're not aware of. And that, in other words, that's real life. So if a person decides that he wants to, go against God and he wants to light a fire on Shabbat, or if he wants to, he does it. In order to get the death penalty, you have to do a sin on purpose, and you have to be warned, and etc. So a person decides he wants to do it. He's going to do a sin on purpose. So what did he do? He wrecked up the whole eternalness of life. He denied this whole hidden reality that's real reality, and he stuck. So he says, in order to fix this up, there was the death penalty. That's why it says that anyone who got punished in this world, the punishment he would be free to go to the world to come and be reincarnated or whatever. But before the Torah was given, it says anybody who is punishable by flogging. There's like 207 sins that a person can get flogged for, and some of them are things that if a person is not beaten, not flogged, so he gets cut off from heaven. He dies before he's 50 or 70, 60, whatever it is. But if he does get beaten, chayavi krisus, those people who are supposed to be cut off from God, if they receive lashes, then nifteri yadei kriyasason, then they're not punishable anymore. They're not punishable by God. And so it is also the punishment of death. It says by Achan. Achan was a person in one of the, I think it was in Jericho, that was in Jericho, or I don't remember. He fought with Joshua. He was in the war. Joshua said, Joshua said, don't take any spoils of war, and he did take. And because of that, there was a plague on the Jewish people, and finally he admitted that he took it, and he died. It says because he died, he says you haven't got any portion in this world, but you do have a portion in the world to come. So it comes out that the punishment came to fix up his soul. But sin itself is worse than death. Sin itself cannot be fixed. It has to be destroyed. The sin itself. The soul can be fixed. Like it says, "Etachayim v'etatov v'etamovet v'etara," death and bad. So bad and death are things that are going to be eradicated. That in the days of the Mashiach, especially the raising of the dead, there's not going to be any more death. There won't be any more evil. It's not that they'll coexist. So it comes out that bad is worse than death. Death brings about a fixing up. Bad is nothing. It has to be fixed up. It has to be eradicated. So this is an interesting thing, that the Torah comes out, that the Torah, when the Torah is there, the punishments of the Torah, that really includes the right and the left. God's kindness and God's severity. But all the punishments and the severities that God gave before the Torah was given, it was pure, pure bad. It was pure, power, just to erase the bad, and that's it. It wasn't to fix anything up. Like, for instance, the generation of the flood. It says the generation of the flood, they haven't got a part in the world to come. Also, the generation of the Tower of Babel. It says that according to some opinions, they have no place in the world to come. That's it. Their soul is just totally wiped out, and they have no... This is what's called total severity of God. So the Rebbe is going to say, this is the idea of including the left in the right. This is called shalom. This is called to make peace in the lower worlds as well. This is fixing up the severities, the egotism, the selfishness, the hatred with the kindness of God. And this is the whole thing of the Torah. The Torah, it says, miyamino eish dat, that from God's right hand is a fiery law. Fiery religion. It's called, the Torah in the upper world is called a black fire on white fire. That's what it means. The first of the 10 Commandments, I am God. And the second of the 10 Commandments is a prohibition. Don't worship any other God. Positive and negative, that's chesed, God's love, and God's power, fear of God, are included together. And that's the whole idea of the details of the Torah. All the diktukei Torah, that comes from the Gevurus and the Tzimtzumim, comes from God's power and God's severity. And this is what the Torah fixes up by taking all these details of the Torah, all these little tiny laws and specifications in the Torah. Tefillin have to be exactly this. Shabbat comes exactly at this time. What exactly it means to eat forbidden food. What exactly is proper slaughtering. All these details. This is what fixes up the world. This takes the severities of the world and puts God's love into them. The Torah. And if not, all these details about what is kosher and what is puzzle, these are really the ultimate kindness of God. That's why it's such a terrible thing, these terrible mistake, all of these movements in the world that try to take away the details of the Torah. The details to make things lenient. Right? Conservative Judaism, Reform Judaism, Christianity, right? Taking the law, the Torah, and taking away all the details. Right? The details are not important. You take it and leave it, or whatever, or just leave it. Because the Torah, through its details, is the only way to fix up the false egotism and severity and hatred that's found in the world. That's what it means, Yamino Eish Dat. Of course, the Torah has to be learned in a proper way. It has to be learned and appreciated that it's God's will, God's wisdom, God's love in this world. It has to be learned with the proper, therefore that's the idea of praying before you have to fix up your heart. You have to love God. You have to fear God. You have to give charity. You have to love other people. You have to, right? And by means of this, together with the Torah, brings this tremendous blessing. That's drawn down, including the inclusion of and the harmony of Chesed and Gevura, God's love and God's power, which are two opposites. Left, it says the left will be included in the right. That's why it says when God created the world, what is it? God created the world, that God has severity and kindness, but the main thing by God is the kindness. That's the Torah. This world, which is created by God, also has all the aspects of God, but here the main emphasis is on the severity, separateness in the world. So the problem with this world is there's too much separateness, there's too much severity in the world. And the Torah comes to temper that and fix that up. It says that's what's going to cause the oneness, and this is really the secret of eliminating hatred. When people start to feel that the reason that they are egotists and that the reason that they're separate is really a very good source, that everybody's an individual and everyone is special. And because I am an individual and I'm special, I have something to contribute to everyone, to teach everyone. But on the other hand, everyone in the world, they're also separate. God also created them to be separate. And they also have something to contribute. So I have to learn from everybody in the world. So everybody is much better than me. They have something to teach me. On the other hand, I'm much better than everybody else. I have something to teach everyone else. So this is what tempers and brings a balance between my egotism and my separateness, right, and godliness. It brings godliness into my separateness, that I have something to contribute to everyone. But on the other hand, I have to learn from everyone. So I have an obligation to give, and I also have an obligation to be humble and receive. That, by the way, is the reason it says that Moses is the most humble person in the world. He realized he had something to receive from everybody. And that is the whole secret of bringing peace into the world and defeating Midian. And this why it says that every Jew has to do it. It says, hey chaltzu, everybody, even though in fact all the Jews did not go, only 1,000 from each tribe, is because each one of us has to do it for all of the generations to fight against this Midian. It's constantly a very, how do you say, it's constantly a dominant but concealed aspect of our personalities. This hating and distrust and disharmony with other people. And it can only be fixed up by learning the Torah, bringing the ideas of the Torah in the world, and learning with a proper attitude, connecting to the Creator of the world. And that's what will bring peace and Mashiach now. Have a good day, everyone, with Mashiach now.